Why are citizens of countries that engage in free trade better off than citizens of countries that don't? Ambassador Terry Miller has answers. He'll discuss them next on Global Perspectives.
This is Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to Global Perspectives. What is economic freedom? How does the United States rank internationally? For insights, we turn to Ambassador Terry Miller, who heads two key research centers at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome to the show, Ambassador Miller.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So talk to us a little bit about your diplomatic career first, and then we'll get into your current research. When did you first become a diplomat?
Well, I joined the Foreign Service in 1976. That was the 200th anniversary of American independence, so it was a great time to become a U.S. diplomat.
And where did they send you to start off?
I started off in Milan, Italy. I got to go there because my wife is an opera singer, and they asked, does anyone have a good reason to go to Milan? Because that's a pretty nice place to go. I stuck up my hand and said, my wife sings opera. They said, the job's yours.
Because that's not usually one of the initial assignments.
Oh, no. Many of my fellow Foreign Service officers went to much less attractive places for their first assignment.
So after Italy, where did you head?
I started to specialize in UN economic affairs. So I spent 4 years as our representative at the UN Education, Science, and Culture Organization. Then I had tours in Barbados, in New York City at the UN again, in New Zealand, a very nice place to live, I might add, and then back to New York again.
Well, you had variety, because a lot of times Foreign Service officers seem to concentrate on regions, but you went from Europe to the Caribbean to the Pacific and back.
Well, the UN specialization really enabled me to deal with a wide variety of different issues. Over my career, I've looked at human rights, women's issues, economic development, monetary policy, agricultural trade, a very large range of issues, and it made for a very exciting and fulfilling career.
So the good thing was you took that background in economics and trade and monetary policy and are putting it to good use today.
Well, I'm very proud of the Index of Economic Freedom. We look at measures of economic freedom in almost 180 countries around the world. And countries really pay attention. We're looking at the policy environment that governments create, how much freedom they give individuals to make decisions for themselves about where to work, what to do with their resources, how can entrepreneurs function in a society. That makes a huge difference in the quality of life for people.
If you're defining economic freedom, it would obviously include some of the things you just mentioned. What else goes into that?
Well, we look especially at the rule of law. If you don't have a basic system in which individuals can count on how they're treated by the justice system, that is, they don't have to operate at the whim of whoever is in power that year, then that gives you some stability. We look at things like property rights. Can you own property and be sure that if you do something to develop it, you will actually enjoy the benefits of that? So those are very important foundational aspects for economic freedom.
So the expectation that many people would have, at least in the United States, is that America probably ranks pretty high on this list. Where does it actually rank, and could it do better?
Well, this year America's 11th place in the rankings. Unfortunately, that's at the end of a long, slow glide down from 4th place where we were 10 years ago. So the U.S., while still pretty good by international standards, is deteriorating every year. In other words, Americans are losing economic freedom each year, and that's going to cause problems in the future.
There's a lot of conversation in this year's presidential campaign about the economy, about international trade. And based on what some of the candidates say and what some audience members respond, it seems that a lot of Americans really don't like of international trade. Is that the case? Do they like it? Do they not like it? Or does it really depend on how you ask the question?
Well, it definitely depends on how you ask the question. Most Americans do have a basic understanding that they prosper because of international trade. They understand when they go to Walmart or Target that they're buying goods that are made probably in China or somewhere else overseas, and that they're getting a very good price. So they see a positive impact on their standard of living. But they do worry also about their jobs. And is it possible that international trade is causing jobs to move overseas? Well, I think the answer is that is probably a yes, but the fear of that is probably greatly exaggerated in the minds of most Americans. The percentage of jobs that are lost because of trade is very, very tiny, estimated by Ben Bernanke to be only 2% of the jobs that are lost every year in the United States.
But many politicians seem to wear the claim that international trade contributes to a declining U.S. economy, the loss of jobs. They seem to wear that as sort of a badge of approval.
I would challenge, first of all, your premise that the U.S. economy is declining, and maybe you didn't mean to make that assertion yourself, but politicians certainly do. The fact is the U.S. is an incredibly prosperous society, and that prosperity is widely shared in our society. So I get very impatient with politicians that preach doom and gloom about the American economy. We have a system that really works. And through globalization, we've exported that system around the world, and it's working for other people too. One of the great unsung success stories in the world is the reduction in poverty. The poverty rate has been cut in half in the last 20 years.
And what is the main reason for that?
Well, I think the reason is primarily the expansion of global trade. There are opportunities for everyone to specialize, to make themselves more productive. That increases the amount of goods and services that are available and the amount of income that people earn. It's a win-win for everyone.
So in an ideal world, all countries would eliminate their tariff and non-tariff barriers, and we could compete on an even plane, and presumably the pie will grow as big as it can grow.
Exactly right. What's happened is that in the past, countries have put in place various restrictions on trade, and those have benefited certain companies at the expense of individuals, usually in a society. What we're trying to do in liberalizing trade is remove those special privileges or advantages enjoyed by some and put all Americans back on a level playing field.
Now, there are some countries that have very low overall average tariffs. There's some that have very high ones. There are some countries that have low average tariffs and then high product-specific tariffs. Right. Explain those things to us.
Well, tariffs started out as a revenue-raising measure for most countries. So they weren't primarily intended to protect a certain product or not. And you still see in many of the less developed countries, tariffs used as the primary fundraising avenue for governments. So what they're likely to do in those situations is find the product that is most easily taxed, and a tariff, of course, is nothing more than a tax, and so they'll put a tariff on that, and they'll set it at a level that is necessary to raise the amount of the level of income that they want. In the more advanced countries, tariffs have become more of a protectionist thing. And we have had great success in reducing tariffs, but it's kind of strange that we have to have international negotiations to accomplish this. There's no reason we in America couldn't simply lower our tariffs, our taxes on international commerce ourselves, and all of our consumers would be better off as a result.
Using the U.S. as an example, what is the average tariff, and then what are some examples of some high tariff products?
Yeah, the average tariff in the United States is quite low. It's only about 2%. So we do fairly well on that score. But there are anomalies in the tax code. And it's not just tariffs, it's also quotas. For example, there's a very severe quota on sugar. That might be something that interests your Florida readers because much of the sugar is produced here in Florida. But that causes prices to be almost twice for sugar in the United States what they are in the rest of the world. So we're paying a price for that protectionism. Other things that have high tariffs are things like sneakers for children. And this is something that hurts the poor more than the rich. And so it's really a surprise, I think, to most people to learn that single mother shopping at school time for her son and daughter to have basic shoes is paying a very high tax to the government as part of the price of those shoes.
Why is it that countries in difficult economic times almost have a knee-jerk reaction to want to build a fortress?
Well, you're looking for an enemy sometimes, or not an enemy, but someone to blame, I think. And it's always nicer to blame someone out there than to really take a hard look at yourself and see what you've done, what responsibility you have, or in this case, your government has for the economic problems we have. My own view is that in the United States, many of the problems that we see are really self-inflicted wounds. We have put in place regulatory processes that stifle investment. We've done things that slow down commerce. We've put these tariffs on special products. We've allowed businesses to pay more attention to the politics of getting a special advantage from the government, maybe a break in the tax code or something. They spend more time doing that than they do in figuring out how to build a better widget or provide a better service.
Give us some examples of the benefits that stem from free markets and international trade compared to cases where they're not used and how that holds those systems back.
Yeah, absolutely. The relationships are unambiguous when we look at the international data. Looking at countries around the world, those that have higher levels of economic freedom have much higher per capita incomes. In other words, their people are richer. Those that increase their economic freedom have higher growth rates. So it's an easy policy prescription. You want faster growth, do something to increase economic freedom. But there are also social benefits. It's not just about, a good life is not just about income, it's about other things too. Countries with higher levels of economic freedom have better education systems, they have better health care, they do a better job protecting the environment. Turns out you don't need a heavy-handed command and control regulatory system to better the environment. You can do it through market forces.
Tell us about the evolution of economic freedom and how it relates to political freedom. Some have argued that if you start with a system that is not free and you begin to liberalize it in terms of the economy, over time you will realize that there are pressures for political freedoms as well, and this can change a system entirely over a period of decades.
I think that's right. Economic freedom is all about dispersing power in a society. We're about breaking up the combinations of political power, economic power that get together and really create a system of special benefits, of special carve-outs in the law, maybe a special regulatory process that favors one company over another. Economic freedom is all about eliminating that, leveling the playing field, making it possible for individuals to have the power for themselves to decide what to make, where to work, where to invest their money. What this does is it spreads power out in society. I think that's a very powerful tool for promoting democracy. Once you create those multiple centers of power, then you can have people, economic power, then you can have people starting to compete for political power as well.
Certain politicians like to focus on what they say is a big negative about international trade agreements and free trade, that it contributes to job loss in the United States. Perhaps most famously Ross Perot, who ran for president many, many years ago, talked about that big sucking sound of jobs being pulled down into Mexico from the United States. Why is there that perception, and why is it not true?
Well, people look at individuals, and there's no doubt that when a factory closes and individuals lose their job, there may be a factor, international trade might have played a role in that. Usually, more often, it's an American company that will have competed more effectively with them, or they may simply have moved from a high-tax state to a low-tax state. There are a lot of reasons why companies go out of business in a particular community. And yet when we see the plight of the employees who are laid off, not all of them have the ability to adjust quickly to changing life circumstances like that. There can be a lot of tragedy on an individual basis. And I think it's okay for society, appropriate for society to take a look at that and see what can be done. But the wrong answer is to cut down the process of trade and productivity improvements that are going to make us more prosperous in the long run. If you do that, you're going to just get economic stagnation, and we'll all be poorer in the long run then. I don't think anybody should want that.
So let's say you're president for a day and you want to get everything straightened out in the realm of free markets and international trade. Yeah. What would you do, first of all, on the issue of tariffs?
Well, I would eliminate them all.
Unilaterally?
Unilaterally. I mean, who pays tariffs? The people that pay U.S. tariffs are not people in China. They're not people in India. They're Americans who pay higher prices. That's a tax on Americans. And what we're doing is shifting resources with a tariff from one group of Americans to another group of Americans. And I don't think that's really an appropriate activity for the federal government. So I would remove all those tariffs immediately. We'd all enjoy lower prices as a result, and we'd all be competing on a level playing field.
And there wouldn't be any downside.
Well, for companies that have, through political influence in the past, managed to get themselves special favors from Washington, they'd have to learn to live without those. But frankly, I think that's appropriate too.
Let's talk about job losses and job creation. There's a lot of both going on all the time.
All the time.
And again, people are not always as focused on this as they should be, and they're quite confused about economics in general. So I'm glad we're having this conversation today, because I think you're helping us understand in very clear, simple terms exactly what's what. But talk to us about job loss and job creation.
Well, one of the great strengths of the U.S. is the extreme level of what economists call job churn. I'm not sure that's the best term for it, but it's the constant process of destruction and creation of jobs, businesses, and economic activity. The economy of the United States is huge. There are millions and millions of people involved in things. And that means that there are a lot of creation going on and a lot of destruction going on constantly. 70,000 firms in the U.S. go out of business every year, but many more than that are created every year. 20 million Americans lose their job every year. But the U.S. economy creates 29 million jobs. That's in the most recent year we had data for. So this is how we get more productivity. This is how people move to better paying jobs. They produce more, they become more productive. We put more capital with each unit of labor. We get wealthier as a result. It's not a smooth process necessarily, but it's one that over time significantly raises the standard of living for all Americans.
What happens when certain events occur, a tragedy like 9/11, an economic downturn as we've been experiencing, and you have analysts coming out and saying, well, you know, after 9/11, globalization and all the economic aspects of it are over. Or after the recession, you know, world trade volume is down, it's not going to go back to where it was. What do you say to those critics?
Well, I say look at the data. In fact, volume is back up. Our growth rates have recovered a bit. Again, we have a very heavy regulatory burden on the American people and American businesses right now. We've added to that in recent years with new healthcare regulations, new energy regulations that make both healthcare and energy more expensive for people. So we're not doing as good as we could be doing. But the American economy produces an enormous amount of wealth. I'm extraordinarily optimistic about the future for us because as long as we stay the course, we have a system that is proven to work. Can you always improve it around the margins? Of course. And everybody wants to see that happen. But let's not pretend that there are unusually brilliant people in Washington that know what the answers are for everybody. I think there are brilliant people all over this country running small businesses, running family budgets. These people in America, the average people, know what they need economically, and economic freedom is about giving them the power to make those decisions for themselves.
Did I understand correctly that world trade volume is at its peak historically now?
Yes, absolutely.
And U.S. as well?
It has recovered from the recession. We're back to where we were before. There was a dip there, no question about that. But the U.S. is trading more than we have ever traded. We have higher per capita incomes than we have ever had. Could we grow faster? Absolutely. I'd love to see that. And let's get Washington out of the business of micromanaging everything, and maybe we can get back to that 3 or 4% growth rate that we had historically and would very much like to see again.
So what advice would you give to a mid-sized business that has had some successes and is kind of tired at looking at competitors across town, across the state line, and might want to try something international? What words of encouragement would you provide?
Well, there are huge opportunities. With tariffs down all over the world in the last 20, 25 years, there are plenty of places that American businesses can go and look for markets for their goods and services. And Americans can compete. We have a very talented and capable workforce. We have the best capital investment system in the world. So there's no reason American entrepreneurs can't take advantage of foreign opportunities as well as domestic. And there are plenty of places in the world where growth rates are actually higher than those in the United States right now. So that's a big opportunity for people who would like to establish new businesses.
What are the countries where the growth rates are the highest now?
Well, many in Asia. India has a high growth rate. China still has a high growth rate. And those are both so large that there are enormous opportunities for trade and investment in both of those countries. But in many countries around the developing world, there are higher growth rates. These are from a very low level, but nonetheless, they're advancing rapidly. And they're looking for goods and services. They're looking for things that good old American know-how can provide. So I think the opportunities are in fact tremendous.
What would you say to that same mid-sized business that's kind of looking abroad but is fearful because it doesn't have the linguistic or cultural or other training that it feels would allow it to operate successfully in the global marketplace?
Well, you can buy those services. You know, you can buy that capability, that linguistic capability, that cultural knowledge. What you can't buy is the entrepreneurial spirit, which has to be provided by the owner and the workers of the business. And there are always questions of risk. In some countries in the world, there's a political risk. Not every government is as well-meaning as ours. And there are risks to any economic activity, but there are plenty of people out there taking a look at those. Our own index might be a help, but there are rating systems, all kinds of ways you can evaluate what the risks might be and decide whether the return you imagine you're going to get is enough to justify that level of risk.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ambassador Miller.
It's been my pleasure.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.